Cold seeped into my dry suit as I focused on the GPS coordinates. After months of research and permits, we had finally arrived. Below our research vessel, the Seeker, lay the wreck of U-117, a German submarine that vanished in the last months of the First World War. Water conditions look good. Visibility should be around 40 feet once we get past the thermocline, Morgan said, sliding a tablet across the workstation toward me. They tapped at a weather radar display. We've got about 6 hours before this front moves in. That should give you plenty of time for the first dive. I nodded, studying the multi-beam sonar image that revealed the unmistakable cigar shape on the seabed. The wreck's sitting upright. Looks intact. More intact than we expected, Javi said, joining us at the monitors. He adjusted his glasses and leaned closer to examine the sonar data. Most U-boats from this period collapsed under pressure or deteriorated over time. His fingers traced the outline on the screen. But look at these clean lines. The hull structure seems solid. That's what makes this one special, I said. According to naval records, U-117 simply vanished. No distress calls, no debris field, no survivors. Just disappeared while laying mines off the Atlantic coast. Ben appeared from below deck, already half-dressed in his diving gear, his sandy blonde hair sticking up at odd angles. "Guys, I think I found something weird with the magnetometer readings." His words came out quick and breathless. "There's a strange field around the wreck, not like normal metal distortion." "Probably just instrument error," Javi said, turning back to his equipment checks. "We can recalibrate after the first dive." I watched Ben's face fall slightly. "Log it anyway, Ben. Anomalies matter, even if they turn out to be nothing." Ben brightened. "Already did. I've started a separate file for anything that doesn't fit the expected pattern." Morgan checked their watch. "You should start gearing up. I want you in the water within 30 minutes if we're going to maximize bottom time." The next half hour was spent on pre-dive preparations. Each of us had our roles, developed over 3 years of working together on wreck expeditions. Javi checked our rebreather systems, which recycled our exhaled breath by removing carbon dioxide and adding oxygen. Unlike regular scuba gear, rebreathers didn't release bubbles, allowing us to approach wrecks without disturbing sediment. "Added the high-definition camera mounts to your helmets," Javi said, handing me mine. "New prototype. Should give us much clearer footage even in low light." I examined the sleek edition. Battery life? 4 hours continuous recording. He tapped a small button on the side. "Red light means it's running. Try not to hit your head on anything." "That's asking a lot," Ben said with a nervous laugh, already struggling with his dry suit seals. I moved to help him, checking the neck and wrist gaskets. "You good? Not too tight?" "I'm fine." His eyes darted toward the water. Just eager to get down there. Once we were fully equipped, I gathered everyone in the vessel's small briefing area. Morgan pulled up historical images on the main screen. Old photographs of German U-boats and their crews, technical diagrams of the Type UE-2 mine-laying submarines, and the few known facts about U-117's final mission. "Before we go down, I want to review why this wreck matters," I said, looking at each team member. U-117 was one of Germany's most advanced mine layers. She vanished in August 1918, just months before the war ended. Historians believe she was trying to deploy mines when something went catastrophically wrong. I pointed to the diagram. "We're not just looking at metal and machinery down there. This was the tomb of 42 sailors. Captain Richter and his crew never came home. Their families never knew what happened." "Our mission is documentation," I said. "We map the wreck, photograph everything, but touch nothing. This isn't a salvage operation." "What about the rumored war chest?" Ben asked. I read some accounts suggesting U-117 might have been carrying gold. I shook my head. That's exactly the kind of speculation that attracts treasure hunters and leads to sites being damaged. We're scientists, not grave robbers. Those men deserve their rest. Javi checked the dive computers strapped to his wrist. The wreck's sitting at 220 feet. That gives us about 30 minutes of bottom time before we hit decompression limits. We'll conduct a reconnaissance sweep only, I said. No penetration of the hull on this dive. We document the exterior, confirm the submarine's identity, and establish reference points for mapping. Questions? There were none. We'd been over the plan dozens of times during the past weeks. This was what we did. Careful, methodical exploration of historical wrecks that added to our understanding of the past. Morgan helped us with our final equipment checks as we moved to the stern diving platform. I'll be monitoring your communications. Regular check-ins every 5 minutes. Any problems, any concerns, you abort the dive immediately. Yes, Mom, Javi said with a grin, securing his full face mask. I mean it, Morgan said, checking our emergency beacons. This wreck has been down there for over 100 years. It can wait another day if something doesn't feel right. One by one, we entered the water. I went first, feeling the shock of cold as the ocean enveloped me. Our dry suits kept our bodies insulated, but my exposed cheeks tingled from the temperature change. Javi followed, then Ben. We regrouped at the surface, signaled our readiness to Morgan, and began our descent. The world changed as we sank deeper. Sunlight faded, colors vanished, and everything turned to blue, then gray, then black. Our lights pierced the darkness, revealing paths in the otherwise empty space. Small particles floated through our beams like snow. Comms check, I said, my voice sounding hollow through the underwater communication system. Reading you, Javi confirmed. Same here, Ben added. Descent rate nominal. We followed the guideline that connected us to the surface vessel, dropping steadily through the water column. The pressure increased, squeezing against our suits, a sensation that never quite became comfortable no matter how many dives I'd done. At 100 feet, we passed through the thermocline, a sudden drop in temperature where warm surface water met the cold depths. The water clarity improved dramatically. Visibility excellent, I reported to Morgan. We're heading toward the bottom. Should have visual on the target within minutes. Understood, Morgan's voice crackled through our comms. All readings normal from up here. At 200 feet, our lights still vanished into darkness below us. Then, gradually, the seabed materialized, a flat, silty plain stretching into the gloom. There, Ben's voice pitched higher with excitement. 2 o'clock. I turned and my breath caught in my throat. Rising from the seafloor, U-117 appeared in our lights. The submarine rested upright on its keel, its conning tower standing tall. No coral growth obscured its lines, no damage marred its hull. It looked as if it had settled there yesterday, not a century ago. Our lights played across the submarine's bow, revealing the distinctive curve of its hull. Unlike most century-old wrecks, this one retained its structural integrity completely. The deck gun was still mounted forward of the conning tower. Even the wooden decking remained intact. We hovered 20 feet above the wreck, taking in its unexpected preservation. The U-boat waited below us, dark and silent, a perfect time capsule from another era. My God, Javi whispered, his scientific detachment momentarily abandoned. It's perfect. I stared at the wreck, feeling both amazed and uneasy. In all my years of maritime archaeology, I'd never seen preservation like this. The hull showed no rust or marine growth. It doesn't look like it's been down here 100 years, Ben said, voicing what we were all thinking. It looks like it could just start up again. The submarine lay beneath us, a dark shape against the pale seabed. I felt a jolt of energy as the hairs on my arms stood up despite my dry suit. Here was U-117, exactly where it had disappeared a century ago. And whatever had happened to Captain Richter and his crew in their final moments, we were about to disturb their long rest. I swam closer to the U-boat's hull, my gloved hand hovering just inches from the metal without touching it. The submarine rested on the seabed as though it had simply been placed there, rather than sunk in violence. After 100 years underwater, I expected decay, collapse, the signature damage of depth and time. But the U-117 looked almost pristine. "Morgan, are you getting this?" I asked into my comm unit, my voice slightly distorted through my breathing apparatus. "The preservation is remarkable." "Reading you, Eris," Morgan's voice came back, tinny but clear. "Visibility looks excellent on the feed. How's the structural integrity?" I gestured to Javi, who moved along the starboard side with his imaging equipment, his movements slow and precise in the water. "Hull appears intact," Javi reported. "No sign of explosive damage or torpedo hits. This doesn't match any of our theories about its sinking." Ben floated up beside me, his eyes wide behind his mask. I could see his excitement even through all the gear. He pointed toward the conning tower. "Look at the deck gun," he said. "Still mounted, no corrosion on the barrel." I nodded and signaled for us to move forward along the length of the submarine. The cold pressed against my dry suit, a constant reminder of how hostile this environment was to human life. We followed the curve of the hull, documenting every hatch, every rivet, every porthole. The U-117 stretched nearly 65 meters from bow to stern, a dark shadow against the pale sand of the North Sea floor. "I want to check the mine chutes," I said, swimming toward the aft section. If this was indeed on a mine-laying mission, there should be evidence in the rear compartments. We found the external mine chutes exactly where historical documents suggested they would be. 6 ports, 3 on each side, designed to deploy sea mines without surfacing. I ran my light across them, noting that all were closed. "Interesting," I murmured. "If they deployed all their mines successfully, these would be empty and closed. If their mission was interrupted, we might have expected to see at least one jammed open." Javi hovered nearby, his camera whirring softly as it captured 3-dimensional images of every detail. "The rudder and propellers are intact too," he noted. "No obvious mechanical failure." I checked my gauges. We'd been at depth for 22 minutes already. Our specialized equipment would allow us several hours if needed, but I wanted to make efficient use of our time before the approaching storm forced us back to the surface. "Morgan, how's our weather window?" I asked. The reply came with a burst of static. "Still holding at 5 hours before the storm hits. All systems normal up here." We continued our circuit, documenting the torpedo tubes, the anchors, and the distinctive saddle tanks along the sides. Everything appeared remarkably preserved, as though the sea had decided to protect rather than destroy this piece of history. When we reached the conning tower again, I paused, running my light across the metal ladder rungs that led up to the hatch. Something tugged at my professional curiosity, a need to see inside, to understand the final moments of this vessel and its crew. "We need to document the interior," I said, my decision forming. Even limited access would provide invaluable data. Interior access wasn't in the original dive plan, Morgan reminded me through the comm. That would be Phase 2 after reviewing exterior footage. I glanced at my team. Ben looked nervous but eager, while Javi was already assessing the conning tower hatch. "The hull integrity is better than anticipated," I explained. "We're equipped for it, and it would be inefficient to return to the surface only to dive again later." We have plenty of air and time. There was a pause before Morgan responded. Your call, Eris, but maintain continuous communication and exit at the first sign of instability. Understood, I said. We'll just check the control room. Quick in and out. Javi swam up to the conning tower, examining the hatch mechanism. It looks operational. Minimal marine growth on the hinges. That can't be right, Ben said, moving closer. These hatches should be frozen shut after a century. Cold water, low oxygen, minimal currents, I explained. Sometimes preservation can be remarkable in these conditions. Ben didn't look convinced, but he nodded. I'll go first, I said. Javi, follow with the imaging equipment. Ben, you'll come last and keep the hatch secured. If anything feels off, we abort immediately. I positioned myself at the base of the conning tower ladder and began to ascend, one rung at a time. The metal felt solid beneath my gloves. Another surprise. I reached the hatch and braced myself, expecting to struggle with a century of resistance. Instead, it turned with minimal effort, opening into the darkness below. Morgan, we're entering through the conning tower, I reported. Hatch is functional, beginning descent into the control room. Copy that. Keep communications open. I want a status update every 2 minutes. I switched on my shoulder-mounted light and began the descent through the narrow tube of the conning tower. The beam cut through years of undisturbed darkness, revealing the ladder below that would take us into the heart of the submarine. I moved carefully, aware of both the historical significance and the potential dangers of entering a century-old wreck. Coming down, I announced, more for my team than for the record. The ladder held my weight without complaint, another impossibility that I filed away to examine later. The control room appeared below me, a chamber frozen in time. My light swept across instrument panels, periscope housing, and the command station where Captain Richter would have stood. Everything was coated in a thin layer of silt, but otherwise looked as though the crew had simply stepped away moments ago. I'm in the control room, I said, both to Morgan above and to my team behind me. It's incredible, completely intact. I moved aside as Javi began his descent. His methodical approach was exactly what we needed. He would document everything with scientific precision while I focused on historical context. He joined me a moment later, his camera already sweeping the space. This defies explanation, he whispered, his voice tight with controlled excitement. There should be deterioration, collapse. The pressure at this depth alone should have... Ben, you're clear to come down, I interrupted, not wanting to get lost in theories yet. We needed to complete our documentation first. I heard Ben's breathing through the comm as he navigated the conning tower ladder. I continued my survey, noting the depth gauges, the speaking tubes, the navigation charts still visible on their table. Everything was in place, as though waiting for a crew that would never return. Almost down, Ben called from above. That's when I felt it, a change in the water, a shift in pressure that made my ears pop despite my equipment. The metal around us seemed to flex, like a chest drawing breath. Did you feel that? I asked Javi, who nodded, his camera momentarily forgotten. Morgan, are you picking up any pressure changes or current shifts? I asked, suddenly uneasy. The comm crackled with static. Morgan? Do you copy? More static, then silence. I looked up toward the conning tower just as Ben's fins appeared at the bottom of the ladder. He dropped the final distance into the control room, turning to secure the hatch above as instructed. Guys, something's not right with my... The rest of his sentence was cut off by a sound that shouldn't have been possible, the metallic groan of the hatch slamming shut with violent force. The impact reverberated through the submarine, shaking ancient dust from surfaces that had been undisturbed for a century. "What the hell?" Ben spun around, staring up at the sealed hatch. "I didn't touch it." "Morgan, we've had a hatch closure," I said urgently into my comm. "Do you copy?" Nothing but dead air answered me. The communication system that had been working perfectly moments before was now completely silent. "Javi, check your comm," I ordered, fighting to keep my voice steady. He adjusted his equipment, his movements quick but controlled. Nothing. Complete signal loss. Before I could respond, the submarine groaned around us, not the passive sound of metal under pressure, but something active, alive. A tremor ran through the deck plates beneath our fins. "That's not possible," Javi whispered, his scientific certainty crumbling. I turned toward one of the small viewports, expecting to see the still murky waters of the North Sea floor. Instead, my light revealed water in motion, churning, violent motion. A flash illuminated the darkness outside, followed by another. "Are those—" Ben's voice caught. "Explosions," I confirmed, watching as another flash bloomed in the distance, sending shockwaves through the water that rocked the submarine. The impossible truth dawned on me as gauges that should have been frozen and dead for 100 years began to flicker and move. Needles jumped. Lights that had no power source glowed dimly, and the creaking of the hull became the sound of a vessel under attack. We weren't just in a wreck anymore. Somehow we were in the U-117 during its final moments in 1918, as depth charges rained down from above. Water rushed around the viewport as another explosion sent vibrations through the hull. The gauges on the control panel, which should have been dead for a century, jumped and twitched as if possessed. I looked at Javi and Ben, their eyes wide behind their masks. "What's happening?" Ben's voice shook through our internal comms. I opened my mouth to answer when the air in front of me changed. A figure appeared. No, materialized right where I stood. Not solid, but not entirely transparent either. I could see the control panels through his body. The ghostly sailor moved through me as if I wasn't there, speaking rapid German to another figure who had appeared beside the ballast controls. More translucent forms took shape throughout the control room. Men in German naval uniforms moving with urgent purpose, their faces tight with fear. "Are you seeing this?" Javi whispered, backing against the wall as a phantom crewman walked through him. "They don't see us," I said, watching as the ghostly sailors worked frantically at their stations. Their movements had purpose, raising periscopes, adjusting valves, calling readings to each other in panicked German. I counted at least 8 crew members now. Their forms, pale blue-gray with edges that seemed to waver like smoke underwater. The details on their uniforms were remarkably clear. Buttons, insignia, even the expressions on their faces as they fought to save their dying vessel. "These are the crew," I breathed, "the men who died here." Another explosion rocked the submarine closer this time. The phantom crew stumbled as we did, but they righted themselves and continued their desperate work. A new figure emerged from what must have been the captain's quarters, taller than the others, broad-shouldered, with an air of command despite the chaos. His uniform marked him as the senior officer. This had to be Kapitän Leutnant Richter, the U-boat's commander. He called out orders in sharp German, his voice strangely muffled, yet audible, as if coming from underwater or from very far away. The crew responded immediately, adjusting controls and reporting back. I stepped closer, fascinated despite my fear. This was history literally coming alive before us. I had studied this submarine, these men, their final mission for years, and now I was witnessing their last moments. Richter turned toward the periscope, and as he did, his gaze swept across where I stood. He stopped. His eyes widened. He saw me. His face transformed from determined focus to something else entirely. raw terror mixed with rage. He shouted something in German, pointing directly at me. Ist nicht menschlich. Dämonen aus der Tiefe. The other crew members turned, their expressions changing as they too became aware of our presence. What had been invisible to them moments before was now fully visible. 3 figures in black, bulky dive gear with strange masks and lights, standing among them like creatures from another world. They can see us now, I said, my voice tight. Back up. Slowly. What did he say? Ben asked, fear edging his voice as he pressed against the bulkhead. Something about demons from the deep, I translated roughly, my mind racing through my knowledge of German. Richter shouted another command. 2 of the sailors pulled pistols from holsters, Lugers that looked as ghostly as their owners, yet somehow still threatening. They raised them toward us. They think we're some kind of supernatural threat, I said, raising my hands instinctively. We need to... The first shot cut through my words. I felt nothing, but Javi cried out beside me, more from shock than pain. The ghostly bullet had passed through his shoulder without leaving a mark. They can't hurt us, Javi said, his scientific mind still trying to make sense of the impossible. They're not physically. Another explosion hit, far larger than before. The submarine lurched violently to one side. The depth gauge spun wildly as we were thrown against the starboard wall. The ghostly crew scrambled for handholds, shouting in panic. A terrible groaning sound filled the chamber, metal under extreme pressure, about to give way. The hull's going to breach, I called out, reaching for Ben who had fallen to his knees. We need to get out now. Water began spraying through a seam in the hull, but it wasn't the clear, cold seawater from outside. This water looked different. It carried the same translucent quality as the Ghost crew. Historical water from 1918, somehow just as deadly to us as the real thing. The phantom sailors abandoned their posts as more water gushed in. Some headed toward the escape hatches, others simply braced for the inevitable. Richter stood at his station, still focused on us, even as his ship died around him. He raised his own Luger and fired directly at me. I felt a strange cold pass through my chest where the spectral bullet traveled, followed by pressure. Not from the bullet, but from the water now rushing into the control room with crushing force. The bulkhead behind Ben buckled inward with a screech of tearing metal. The pressure wave hit him first, slamming him against the opposite wall with bone-breaking force. His regulator tore from his mouth, his limbs splayed at impossible angles. "Ben!" Javi screamed, lunging toward him. The control panel erupted in a shower of sparks and broken glass as another depth charge detonated directly above us. The ceiling collapsed, a support beam crashing down onto Javi before I could reach him. Water filled the compartment completely now, a bizarre mixture of real and phantom ocean. I couldn't breathe. My equipment seemed to malfunction in this impossible space between past and present. My vision darkened at the edges as the pressure crushed my chest. The last thing I saw was Richter's face, watching with a strange mix of triumph and terror as his enemies and his own life were extinguished together. Then, everything went black. I gasped, my body jerking forward as if waking from a falling dream. My hands flew to my chest, expecting to feel the crushing pressure, but there was nothing. I was standing upright, unharmed. The submarine control room surrounded me, quiet and stable. No water, no crushing pressure, no dying crewmen. Ben and Javi stood beside me, looking as stunned as I felt. We were positioned exactly where we had been when we first entered the control room, our equipment intact, our bodies uninjured. "What just happened?" Ben asked, his voice shaking. I died. I know I died. Javi checked his dive computer, then looked up with wide eyes. "We're back at the starting point. Look at the time." I checked my own dive computer. The timestamp showed we had reset to exactly when we'd first entered the control room 12 minutes ago. Another distant boom sounded, and the submarine shuddered gently. The first depth charge, just as before. "This isn't possible," Javi whispered, the scientist in him rebelling against what we were experiencing. "This defies every law of physics." I looked toward the viewports, seeing the same churning water, the same flashes of explosions beginning again. Time doesn't loop. It can't. But it was. Somehow, we had reset to the beginning of the U-boat's final moments. 12 minutes of terror and destruction, played out again. "We need to get out before they appear," Ben said urgently, moving toward the ladder to the conning tower. He pushed against the hatch, then pushed harder, his muscles straining. It sealed shut, just like before. Another explosion, closer this time. The submarine groaned, and then they appeared again, the translucent figures of the German crew materializing at their stations. But something was different this time. One of the sailors turned immediately toward where Ben stood at the ladder, his eyes narrowing with recognition. "They remember us," I said, my blood going cold. "Look at their eyes. They know we're here already." Richter emerged from his quarters, and this time he didn't need to turn and discover us. He walked directly to the center of the control room, his ghostly eyes locked on mine from the moment he appeared. The impossible had become undeniable. We were trapped in the repeating final moments of the U-117's destruction, and with each reset, the crew grew more aware of us, more hostile. We were caught in something beyond science, beyond history, beyond anything our modern minds could readily accept. "They're becoming more aware each time," I said, backing away from Richter's penetrating stare. "Like they're learning." Richter barked orders in German, and this time his men responded with frightening efficiency, abandoning their posts and advancing toward us. Their faces no longer showed surprise, only determined hostility. "We need a plan," Javi said, his voice strained as he pressed against the bulkhead, ghostly sailors approaching from both sides. "If this is really happening, if we're really caught in some kind of time loop, there must be a way out." Ben's breathing grew rapid and shallow. "This can't be real. We can't be trapped here." Another depth charge exploded, closer than the last, sending vibrations through the hull that made the phantom sailors stumble. They recovered more quickly than before, adapting to the rhythm of their own destruction. "They see us as intruders," I said, watching how Richter coordinated his men's movements with military precision. "Maybe even as the cause of their deaths." Javi's scientific mind was still fighting against accepting our reality. "This violates every known law of physics. Time doesn't loop. The dead don't..." A ghostly sailor lunged through Javi, making him flinch despite the lack of physical contact. The sensation of having someone pass through your body wasn't painful, but it left a bone-deep chill that lingered. "Accept it, Javi," I said, ducking as another sailor swung what looked like a wrench at my head. "We're trapped in their final moments. We died and came back. And unless we figure something out, we'll keep dying over and over." The submarine rocked violently as multiple explosions hit in sequence. I recognized the pattern now. 3 rapid detonations that had signaled the beginning of the end for the U-117. "We have about 6 minutes before the hull breaches completely," I said, recalling my research on similar U-boat sinkings. Ben pushed himself away from the ladder, desperation in his eyes. "Let's try to get through them. Head toward the aft compartments. Maybe there's another way out." We moved together, instinctively forming a tight group as we tried to navigate through the control room. The ghostly crew converged around us, their translucent forms closing in like a fog. Richter stood directly in our path, his face a mask of cold fury. He raised his Luger and fired repeatedly. Each shot sent a wave of numbing cold through whatever part of our bodies it passed through, but caused no physical harm. "They can't hurt us directly," Javi observed, his analytical mind still functioning despite his fear. "But last time, when the hull breached, we died just like they did," I finished for him. "We're connected to their fate somehow." We pushed forward, moving through the Phantom crew. Each passage through their bodies left us chilled and disoriented. They couldn't stop us physically, but they adjusted their positions constantly, making our progress maddeningly slow. The hull groaned around us, metal stressed beyond its limits. Water began to spray from seams in the bulkheads, the same ghostly water from before, somehow just as deadly to us as real seawater would be. "We're not going to make it," Ben said, his voice cracking. Just like last time. A massive explosion directly overhead sent us all to the floor. The ceiling buckled inward and phantom pipes burst, sending clouds of pressurized steam into the compartment. I looked up to see Richter standing over me, his face just inches from mine. There was something in his eyes beyond hate, a desperate determination, perhaps even a question. He spoke, his German words faint but clear. "Warum seid ihr hier? Why are you here?" Before I could respond, the hull gave way completely. The torrent of water crashed into the compartment with unstoppable force. The pressure hit like a concrete wall, crushing the air from my lungs. Darkness closed in as my consciousness faded. Then the reset. I gasped, finding myself standing at the entrance to the control room once again. Ben and Javi beside me, unharmed. The dive computer showed the same time as before. 12 minutes until destruction. "It happened again," Ben said, his voice hollow with shock. "We're back at the beginning." Javi checked his equipment with trembling hands. "This isn't a hallucination. It's not nitrogen narcosis or oxygen toxicity. Our gas mixtures are correct. Our equipment is functioning normally." "It's real," I said, accepting what my rational mind had been fighting against. "We're caught in their final moments, their final death, and they know we're here now." As if summoned by my words, the ghostly crew began to materialize around us. This time they appeared all at once, already oriented toward our positions. Richter stood at the center of the control room, his eyes locked on mine the moment he appeared. He knew exactly where we would be. "They're learning," Javi whispered. "Each time we loop, they become more aware, more prepared." The submarine shuddered as the first depth charge detonated in the distance. The 12-minute countdown had begun again. The ghostly crew moved toward us with purposeful coordination, no longer surprised or confused by our presence. "We need to understand this," I said, my historian's mind searching for patterns even in this impossible situation. "If we're trapped in their final moments, there must be a reason. There must be a way out." Richter gave an order, and his crew spread out to surround us. Their faces showed a strange mix of fear and resolve. They were as trapped in this moment as we were, dying over and over, never finding peace. Ben's voice shook as he spoke the terrible truth we all now faced. What if there isn't a way out? What if we're stuck here forever, dying with them again and again? The ghostly sailors closed in around us as the U-boat continued its death throes. Our scientific certainties had been shattered. The impossible had become our reality. We were trapped in the repeating final moments of the U-117's destruction, with each reset making the ghostly crew more aware, more hostile, and more determined to drag us down with them. Richter's eyes locked with mine, recognition burning in them like blue flame. Behind me, Ben's breathing quickened through his rebreather. The submarine groaned around us, metal protesting as depth charges exploded in the water outside. "We need to move," I said, grabbing Javi's arm. "Now." We'd barely taken 2 steps when the ghostly captain barked orders to his crew in rapid German. Unlike before, they moved with purpose, not panicked, but organized. 3 sailors blocked our path to the ladder while others closed in from behind. "They're hurting us," Javi whispered. A massive explosion rocked the submarine. I stumbled against the navigation table as water sprayed from a rupture in the port side hull. The cold spray passed through the spectral sailors as if they weren't there, but soaked us to the skin. Ben pressed himself against the bulkhead. "We're going to drown again." The submarine pitched violently. Equipment tore loose from mountings. A heavy toolbox slid across the floor, passing through ghostly legs before smashing into Ben's shin. He cried out in pain. Richter pointed at me, his mouth forming that same word, "Dämonen!" But this time there was calculation in his eyes. Water rose around our ankles as the hull breached further. I knew what came next. The final explosion, the crushing darkness, then reset. I closed my eyes as the pressure built, and everything went black. I gasped, finding myself back at the bottom of the ladder in the control room. Dry. Unharmed. Ben stood behind me, Javi stepping down from the bottom rung. "Third time," Javi said, checking his dive computer. "Same exact moment." "We keep dying," Ben muttered. "Over and over." The air around us began to shimmer again, the ghostly crew materializing as they had twice before. But this time, I grabbed Javi and Ben, pulling them beneath the navigation table. "Hide," I whispered. "Let's see if they notice us." We crouched in the shadows as the translucent sailors moved through their routine. Captain Richter appeared at his station barking orders in German. Unlike our previous loops, he didn't immediately spot us. Instead, he focused on the gauges, unaware of our presence. We watched for a minute without being seen. Ben's breathing slowed as the threat faded. Javi took out a waterproof notebook and started drawing a map of the control room, marking where the crew was positioned. 8 sailors in this room, he whispered. Captain makes 9. 2 at the helm, 1 at communications, others at various stations. The first depth charge exploded outside, making the submarine rock gently. Sailors steadied themselves against railings and equipment. 12 seconds from crew appearance to first explosion, Javi noted, making a mark in his book. Remember that. I studied Richter closely. His face showed concern but not panic. He moved confidently, checking gauges and talking with officers. His focus stood out amid the chaos. The second explosion hit harder. A sailor stumbled against our hiding spot, his ghostly form passing partially through the table. He froze, turning slowly to look down. His eyes widened. "Capitan!" Richter's head snapped toward us, his expression shifting from surprise to fury. He shouted commands, and the crew converged on our position. "Run!" I yelled, bolting for the corridor that led aft. We sprinted down the narrow passageway, ghostly hands reaching for us, passing through our bodies with that same numbing cold. The submarine rocked violently as more depth charges exploded. "In here!" Javi pulled us into what appeared to be the radio room. "Close the door." Ben slammed the metal door shut. The 3 of us backed against the far wall, breathing hard. "They can walk through walls," Ben pointed out, his voice cracking. "What's a door going to do?" As if on cue, a spectral face pushed through the metal, followed by a uniformed torso. As if on cue, a spectral face pushed through the metal, followed by a uniformed torso. The young sailor's eyes widened at the sight of us. He retreated back through the door, shouting to the others. "They're coming through the walls now," Ben whispered, pressing himself into the corner. His hands shook violently. We can't keep doing this." I surveyed the radio room, Morse key on the desk, charts pinned to the wall, a single small porthole showing the dark water outside. The equipment looked operational, with lights blinking on the radio set. Fourth explosion in 3, 2, 1. Javi counted down, jotting down another note as the submarine rocked at the predicted moment. The timing is exact. Every loop follows the same sequence. How many more until we... Ben couldn't finish the sentence. 2 minutes. 17 seconds from the first explosion to hull breach. Another 43 seconds until implosion, Javi said, his dive light shining on his face. We reset at 3 minutes, 12 seconds into the loop. The door flew open. 3 ghostly sailors poured into the room, led by a senior officer. They moved with purpose, no longer panicking at our presence but coordinating their approach. Different tactic, I said quickly. Try to communicate with them. I stepped forward, hands raised. We mean no harm, I said loudly in German, one of the few phrases I knew from my historical research. Wir bedeuten keinen Schaden. The ghosts hesitated momentarily, exchanging glances. The officer narrowed his eyes, studying me. For a brief moment, I thought we'd broken through, until Captain Richter appeared behind them. His face hardened with determination. Eindringlinge, he said coldly. Intruders. The final depth charge exploded directly underneath us. The floor buckled, and freezing water erupted through the hull breach. The last thing I saw before darkness took us was Richter's face, watching us with grim satisfaction. We reset again, and again, and again. Each time we tried something different. We ran forward instead of aft. We split up. We attempted to exit through the conning tower. We tried to reason with different crew members. During our 8th loop, we barricaded ourselves in what appeared to be the captain's quarters. Javi had mapped the entire timing sequence by then. 23 seconds until the first explosion, he said, checking his makeshift chart. 49 until the second. The hull breach always occurs in the forward torpedo room at 2 minutes, 17 seconds. Ben sat on the narrow bunk, rocking slightly. I can't do this anymore, he whispered. I can't keep drowning. His eyes had a vacant look that worried me. Maybe we're already dead. Maybe this is hell. I knelt beside him. We're going to figure this out, Ben. Stay with us. The submarine groaned as the first explosion hit, right on Javi's schedule. They're learning, Javi said. Each loop they're more organized. In the first loop, they were terrified. Now they're hunting us. I nodded. I've been watching Richter. He recognizes us now. The first time he was shocked, called us demons. Now he's tactical. He's changing his strategy. Which means this isn't just some repeating moment frozen in time, Javi said. They're conscious. They remember. The door to the captain's quarters suddenly blew inward, torn off its hinges by an explosion we hadn't anticipated. Richter stood in the doorway, flanked by 4 of his men. His eyes met mine, and I saw something beyond anger. Determination. Purpose. He changed the sequence, Javi said in disbelief, checking his notes. That explosion came early. Water began flooding in from the corridor. The submarine listed heavily to port. They're forcing the sinking, I realized. They're controlling the loop. Ben screamed as a ghostly sailor grabbed him. Though the Spectre's hands passed through Ben's body, the cold seemed to paralyze him. 2 more surrounded Javi, who fought uselessly against their insubstantial forms. Richter approached me directly, his face inches from mine. Unlike his men, he didn't try to grab me. He studied me with calculating intensity, as if trying to understand what I was. I stared back, transfixed by the intelligence in those long, dead eyes. What do you want? I asked, though I knew he couldn't understand me. The hull groaned as it began to implode. The lights flickered, and water rushed in from all sides. Richter never broke his gaze, watching me calmly even as the submarine disintegrated around us. As darkness fell, we realized this wasn't just history repeating itself. It was a conscious trap. These men weren't ghosts. They were souls stuck in their last moments, aware of each loop. Somehow we had become trapped in their purgatory. When we reset for the 9th time, I found myself at the bottom of the ladder again. Javi looked at me, his expression grim. "They're not just remembering us between loops," he said quietly. "They're waiting for us." I turned to look at the control room as the air began to shimmer. This time, the crew didn't gradually materialize going about their duties. They appeared all at once, standing in formation, with Captain Richter at their center, all of them staring directly at us. I took an instinctive step backward, colliding with Ben, who was still catching his breath behind me. The ghostly crew stood in perfect formation before us, no longer surprised by our presence. Captain Richter's eyes burned into mine with recognition and purpose. "They're learning," Avi whispered, his voice trembling slightly despite his scientific detachment. "They're adapting to our presence with each reset." Ben pushed past me, his movements jerky with panic. "We need to get out now, before they—" "Wait," I said, grabbing his arm. "Let's watch them first. Maybe we can—" "Watch them?" Ben yanked his arm free. "We've died 8 times already. How many more times do you want to experience that?" The first depth charge exploded outside the hull. The submarine pitched, sending us staggering against the bulkhead. The sailors moved quickly, their forms flickering as they attended to their stations. Only Richter remained still, his eyes fixed on us. Javi pulled out his notebook, still documenting despite the chaos. 12 seconds until the next charge. "You're both insane," Ben hissed. "We need to find a way out, not take notes." The second explosion hit, stronger than the first. A panel of instruments tore loose from the wall, passing harmlessly through one of the spectral crew members before clattering to the floor, inches from my feet. "Run!" I shouted as the ghostly sailors began to move toward us. We ran down the narrow corridor, the crew behind us. I felt them brush past me, each contact like a sudden chill. "The engine room," Javi called out, pointing ahead. "We haven't tried that direction yet." We pushed through a narrow doorway into a cramped space filled with machinery. Massive pistons stood frozen, their ghostly counterparts moving in the hands of phantom engineers. "There's no exit here," Ben said, his voice rising with panic. "You've trapped us." I watched the spectral engineers work, noticing how they kept glancing at an internal communication system. "They're waiting for orders," I said. "Who cares what they're waiting for?" Ben snapped. "I'm sick of this. I'm sick of dying over and over because you two want to play ghost hunters." The third depth charge hit before I could respond. A pipe burst above us, releasing a jet of scalding steam. I ducked instinctively, though I knew from experience that the real damage was yet to come. "You think I'm enjoying this?" I shot back, my own fear hardening into anger. "You think I want to be trapped in this nightmare?" "Stop it," Javi stepped between us. "Fighting won't help. We need to—" The submarine lurched violently, cutting him off. Water began spraying through a crack in the hull, the beginning of the end. We had maybe 60 seconds before the final implosion. "This way." I pushed past them toward the doorway. We stumbled back into the corridor as the lights flickered. The crew moved faster, no longer focused on us. I paused, watching them. "What are you doing?" Ben grabbed my shoulder. "We need to keep moving." "Look at them," I said, shaking off his hand. "They're not just running around in panic. They're trying to do something specific." Through the chaos, I spotted Captain Richter. He wasn't at the control station where a captain should be during an attack. Instead, he was pushing through his men, heading toward a small room off the main corridor. "The radio room," I whispered. "What?" Javi looked where I was pointing. "Richter, he's trying to reach the radio room, not the controls." The submarine shuddered again. Water was pooling around our ankles now.
"So what?"
Ben shouted over the groaning metal.
"How does that help us?"
I watched Richter struggle against the tilting submarine, his ghostly form focused on reaching that room. "He's not trying to save the ship," I said. "He's trying to send a message." Another explosion rocked the vessel. Ben was thrown against a bulkhead, crying out in pain. Javi helped him up as water began pouring in faster. "We need to move," Javi shouted. But I couldn't tear my eyes away from Richter. He had reached the radio room door when a section of ceiling collapsed, its ghostly debris passing through him, but clearly representing a real obstacle from his time. He was fighting to push through, his face contorted with desperate determination. "A message," I repeated, my mind racing. His unfinished business. The final implosion was seconds away. I could feel the pressure building, the hull preparing to give way.
"Aris,"
Javi grabbed my arm.
"we're out of time."
"It's the message," I shouted over the roar of rushing water. "Don't you see? He never got to send his final transmission. That's why they're stuck here. Why we're stuck here." Understanding dawned in Javi's eyes, but before he could respond, the submarine gave a final, terrible groan. The darkness came, along with that now familiar crushing sensation. When I gasped back to awareness, I was standing at the bottom of the ladder again. Javi was beside me, but the space behind us was empty. "Where's Ben?" I spun around, searching the control room. Javi checked his dive computer. Same reset point. He should be right here. The air began to shimmer, signaling the imminent appearance of the crew, but there was still no sign of Ben. "Ben!" I called out, my voice echoing in the metal chamber. The ghostly crew materialized around us, but I barely noticed them. All I could think about was Ben's absence. "They're coming," Javi warned, backing toward me. "We need to find him," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Maybe he reset somewhere else in the submarine. Or maybe he didn't reset at all," Javi said quietly. The implication hit me like a physical blow. If Ben hadn't reset with us, what did that mean? Was he truly gone? Or was he trapped somewhere else in this nightmare alone? Captain Richter stepped forward, his ghostly crew flanking him. This time, instead of shouting "Dämonen," he simply pointed at the hatch above us, then to the empty space where Ben should have been. "He knows," I whispered. "He knows Ben is missing." The submarine started its death sequence again with a loud groan and the first depth charge. But all I could think about was Ben and the fear that we might not survive this loop. "We have to help Richter send his message," I said, grabbing Javi's arm. "It's the only way to break this. It's what he's been trying to do all along." Javi nodded, his scientific skepticism giving way to the reality of our situation. "But how? And what about Ben?" "We find him," I said firmly. "And then we help Richter finish what he started." The second depth charge hit. The hunt would begin again, but this time, everything was different. We weren't just trying to escape. We were trying to right a wrong. We had lost one of our own, raising the stakes higher than ever. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until Ben materialized beside me, doubled over and gasping. The relief that flooded through me was short-lived when I saw his face, pale, drawn, and twisted with an anger I hadn't seen before. "Ben!" "You're back." I reached for his shoulder, but he jerked away from my touch. "Don't." His voice was hollow. "Just don't." Javi stepped down from the bottom rung of the ladder, his expression torn between relief at seeing Ben and concern at the tension crackling between us. The control room remained momentarily quiet, that eerie stillness before the ghostly crew would reappear. We had maybe 30 seconds. "Where did you go?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "You weren't here when we reset." Ben's laugh was bitter. "I was trapped, alone, in the flooding engine room." He tapped his temple with 2 fingers. "Got to experience drowning all by myself while you two were busy taking notes." "That's not fair," I said, though guilt twisted in my stomach. "We had no control over. We wouldn't be here at all if you hadn't insisted on entering this damn submarine." Ben's voice rose dangerously. "Your precious historical curiosity is going to get us all killed." "Oh wait, it already has." Repeatedly, Javi stepped between us, hands raised. "Fighting won't help. We need to." He stopped, frowning at the display on his wrist computer. The screen flickered, numbers and letters jumbling into nonsensical patterns before going dark. He tapped it, then shook it. "That's impossible. This thing has redundant systems." The air around us began to shimmer, that now familiar distortion that preceded the ghost's appearance. Javi pulled a second device from his belt, a small scanner he'd been using to map the submarine's layout, but its screen displayed only static. "Nothing's working," he muttered, genuine fear creeping into his voice. "The electromagnetic readings are off the charts, but that shouldn't affect sealed systems like these." The ghostly crew materialized, but differently this time. They phased into existence all at once, standing in rigid formation. Captain Richter stood at their center, his translucent eyes immediately finding mine. I stepped back involuntarily. There was purpose in that gaze, a cold calculation that sent chills down my spine. "We need to get out," Ben hissed. "Now. I'm not dying again." Javi nodded, his scientific skepticism giving way to primitive survival instinct. "Maybe we can force our way out through a weak point in the hull." "The torpedo tube," I suggested, pointing down the corridor. "It has an external hatch." Ben didn't wait for discussion. He took off down the passageway, Javi close behind. I hesitated, looking back at Richter, who hadn't moved to pursue us yet. His men stood waiting for orders, but the captain's eyes remained fixed on me. The first depth charge exploded outside, rocking the submarine, but Richter didn't flinch. I turned and ran after my teammates. The torpedo room was cramped, filled with ghostly sailors loading a weapon that would never be fired. Ben pushed through them, ignoring the cold sensation as their forms passed through his body. He reached the torpedo tube and examined the loading mechanism. "This one's empty," he said, a hint of hope in his voice. "If we can open the inner door and crawl inside." "The pressure differential would kill us instantly," Javi warned, but Ben was already working the manual release. "Our suits can handle short exposure," Ben insisted. "Better than being trapped in this nightmare forever." I opened my mouth to object when Javi's remaining functional device began emitting a high-pitched whine. He ripped it from his belt and threw it to the floor, where it sparked and smoked. "Something's interfering with all our tech," he said, looking around wildly. "Something that shouldn't be possible." The second depth charge hit, stronger than the first. The submarine groaned, metal straining against the pressure. One of the ghostly sailors turned toward us, his mouth moving in silent warning. Ben managed to wrench the inner door of the torpedo tube partially open. Water immediately began to spray through the gap with terrifying force. He stumbled backward as the torrent intensified. "Close it," Javi shouted, lunging forward to help Ben push against the door. The pressure was too great. The door flew open completely, and seawater erupted into the compartment with explosive force. Ben was thrown against the opposite wall, while Javi and I were knocked to the floor. Water filled the room with impossible speed as the hull integrity failed catastrophically. I heard Ben scream something, saw Javi reaching toward me, and then felt the crushing weight of the ocean collapsing the submarine around us. Darkness, pressure, cold. Then I was standing at the bottom of the ladder in the control room, dry and unharmed. Javi stepped down beside me, coughing as if he could still feel water in his lungs. Ben appeared a moment later, his eyes wide with terror. "We triggered an early implosion," Javi said, voice shaking. "The torpedo tube was a stupid idea," Ben finished, leaning against the bulkhead. "I just wanted out." The ghostly crew hadn't appeared yet, but something felt different. The usual shimmer in the air was absent. Instead, the temperature in the control room seemed to drop gradually, our breath becoming visible in small clouds. "Something's changed," I whispered. When the crew materialized this time, they were scattered throughout the room, each at their stations, except for Richter. The captain stood directly in front of me, barely an arm's length away. His face was inches from mine, those dead eyes studying me with disturbing intensity. "Mein Gott," I breathed, unable to move. Richter's hand lifted slowly, pointing not at me but past me, toward the corridor that led to the radio room. His lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear. Behind him, his crew worked with frantic urgency, preparing for a death they couldn't escape. The first depth charge exploded, but Richter didn't react. He remained focused entirely on me, moving closer until his ghostly form partially overlapped with my body. The cold was unbearable, seeping into my bones. "He's fixated on you," Javi said, backing away. "What did you do?" "Nothing," I gasped, stepping backward to escape the cold. Richter followed, maintaining that terrible proximity. "He's trying to tell me something." Ben grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "We need to hide, to find a different way out." "No," I said, the realization crystallizing in my mind. "Don't you see? We've been fighting against this from the beginning, trying to escape or outsmart it. That's why we keep failing." The second explosion hit, and a panel tore loose from the wall. Richter's form flickered, but his eyes never left mine. "He's not trying to hurt us," I continued, the pieces falling into place. "He's trying to accomplish something. Remember how he was struggling to reach the radio room before the submarine imploded? He needs to send a message to complete his mission." "You want us to help the ghosts?" Ben asked incredulously. "The same ghosts who've been hunting us down?" "They're not hunting us," I insisted. "They're trapped, just like we are. They've been trying to complete their final duty for 100 years, dying over and over in this endless loop." Javi looked between me and Richter, his scientific mind visibly struggling with the supernatural reality before us. "You think if we help them finish whatever they need to do, the loop might break," I finished. "We've tried everything else. Fighting against it only resets us faster." Water began spraying from a ruptured pipe, and the submarine groaned ominously. We had maybe 2 minutes before the final implosion. Ben shook his head. "This is insane." "More insane than dying over and over?" I asked. "More insane than ghostly German sailors who remember us across time?" Richter's form grew more solid, more present, as if my understanding had strengthened his connection to our reality. He gestured again toward the radio room, more urgently this time. Javi took a deep breath. "What's your plan?" "We help him send his message," I said, watching as Richter's eyes showed a flicker of something beyond determination. Perhaps hope. We stop fighting against the loop and start working with it. It's the only way we'll ever get out. The third explosion rocked the submarine violently. Alarms blared and water began pouring in faster. Ben looked from me to Richter, then to the flooding corridor. "If you're wrong, we just die again," he said finally, resignation replacing fear. "And if I'm right," I replied, "we all get to rest." The water continued to rise around our ankles. Ben stared at me, resignation written across his face. "Fine, we'll try your plan," he said. "But if we die helping these ghosts, I'm going to haunt you in the afterlife." I didn't answer. I kept my focus on Captain Richter, trying to understand what he wanted from us. He stood near the corridor leading to the radio room, his form occasionally flickering as the submarine rocked from another explosion. The pattern was becoming familiar after so many resets. The timing of each depth charge, the sequence of failures throughout the vessel, the final moments before implosion. Javi moved closer to me, speaking quietly. "We need to be methodical about this. What exactly do you think Richter is trying to do?" "Each time we reset, he fights to reach the radio room," I said, watching the ghostly captain. "He's not trying to save the submarine. He knows they're going to die. He's trying to send a message." What message could be so important that he's still trying to send it 100 years later? I thought back to the historical records we'd studied before the dive. The U-117 had disappeared while on a mine-laying mission near British shipping lanes. No distress call had ever been received, no confirmation of mission status. The official records listed the submarine as presumed lost with all hands, mission incomplete. "He wants to tell them the mission was completed," I said, the realization washing over me. The historical record shows the U-117 failed its objective. But what if they actually laid the mines before they were attacked? Richter's fighting to correct history. The submarine lurched violently as another explosion shook the hull. A ghostly sailor passed through Javi, who shivered and stepped back. "How does that help us?" Ben asked, watching nervously as water continued to seep through growing cracks in the hull. "If we help him send his message, maybe the loop breaks," I said. "He's stuck in these final moments because he never completed his duty." Javi looked doubtful, but took out his waterproof notebook. "All right, let's be scientific. We need to track what happens in each loop and where Richter goes." "We don't have time," Ben protested as the submarine groaned under mounting pressure. "We have endless time," Javi countered. "We keep resetting." The submarine gave its final shudder, and darkness claimed us once more. When I opened my eyes, I was standing at the bottom of the ladder again. Ben appeared beside me, followed by Javi. We had reset to the same point as always, giving us a brief window before the ghostly crew materialized. "Quick," I said. "Let's record everything we know." Javi already had his notebook out. "We've got about 30 seconds before they appear. Then 12 seconds to the first depth charge, 47 seconds to the second, and 1 minute and 22 seconds to the third. The submarine implodes approximately 2 minutes and 35 seconds after the crew appears." I nodded. "And Richter always tries to reach the radio room after the third hit, but never makes it. Something always stops him." The air temperature dropped suddenly, our breath becoming visible in the cold. The ghostly crew materialized, but instead of attacking, they moved to their stations with grim efficiency. "Let's split up this time," I suggested quickly. "Javi, follow Richter. Ben, stay with me. Let's see exactly what happens to stop him from reaching the radio." We pressed ourselves against the bulkhead as the first depth charge exploded. The spectral sailors rushed around us, focused on saving their vessel. Javi slipped away, trailing Captain Richter through the chaos. Ben stayed close to me, his eyes darting nervously around the control room. "I'm sorry about what happened to you," I said quietly. "Being trapped alone." Ben's jaw tightened. "Let's just focus on getting out of here." We moved cautiously through the submarine, watching the choreography of doom play out around us. The second explosion hit, and we braced against the wall. My eyes followed the ghostly figures as they worked frantically at their stations. "The mines," I muttered, watching a phantom sailor checking a logbook. "They're keeping records of the mines they deployed." "What?" "Look at the notations." I pointed to the ghostly logbook. "Those are coordinates and timestamps. They completed the mine-laying operation." The third explosion rocked the submarine more violently than the others. Alarms blared as water began spraying through the hull. We pushed forward through the corridor toward the radio room, arriving just as Javi came running from the opposite direction.
I found what stops him!
Javi shouted over the noise of escaping air and creaking metal.
There's a steam pipe that bursts right before he reaches the radio. It hits him every time!
We watched as Richter appeared, fighting his way through the flooding corridor. Just as Javi had said, a pipe above him burst, releasing a cloud of scalding steam directly in his path. The ghostly captain faltered, his form becoming momentarily transparent before he pushed forward again, but precious seconds had been lost. Darkness engulfed us as the submarine imploded once more. We reset. The pattern continued for many loops. Each time we positioned ourselves differently, noticed new details, and pieced together more of the puzzle. We worked with purpose, treating each loop as a chance to gather information. During one reset, I stationed myself in the radio room, examining the equipment while waiting for Richter's doomed approach. The radio operator is already dead, I realized, seeing no ghostly figure at the communication station. That's why Richter is trying to send the message himself. In another loop, Javi focused on our diving equipment, testing how it interacted with the ghostly environment. Our lights affect them, he reported after a reset. When I shined my dive light directly at one of the sailors, he reacted like he could sense it. Could we use that somehow? Ben asked, seeming more engaged than before. Maybe. Javi looked thoughtful. Our equipment is mostly electronic, but there might be a way to generate an electromagnetic field that could interact with their, whatever they are, energy patterns maybe. He started taking apart our imaging equipment during the resets, trying out different setups. By the 7th or 8th loop, he had built a basic device using parts from our underwater cameras and lights. This might work, he said, holding up his device. It generates an electromagnetic pulse that could interact with their radio equipment. You think we can help transmit their message? I asked. Javi shrugged. It's not exactly scientific, but nothing about this situation is. The energy readings I've been getting suggest these aren't just visual phenomena. There's actual electromagnetic interaction happening. What do you need us to do? Ben asked, surprising me with his willingness to help. I need to get this device to the radio room and connect it to the transmission equipment, Javi explained. But with the chaos of the sinking, I'll need help getting there intact. Ben nodded firmly. I'll make sure you both get there. I know the timing of everything now, where debris falls, which corridors flood first. I studied Ben's face, seeing a new determination that had replaced his earlier fear and anger. Are you sure? Look, I was trapped alone, and it was terrible, he said quietly. But I realized something while I was drowning by myself. We're all stuck here together, and turning on each other won't help. If your theory is right, and helping Richter is our way out, then I want to be useful. The submarine reset again, and we continued our preparations, refining our understanding of the sequence of events and the layout of the submarine. During one reset, I found myself alone in the control room while Javi and Ben investigated the engine section. Captain Richter stood at the periscope station, his ghostly hands gripping controls that had long since rusted away in our time. The first depth charge had just exploded, but the immediate panic hadn't yet set in. In this brief moment of relative calm, Richter turned his head and looked directly at me. Our eyes met across the impossible divide of a century, and something passed between us. Not the hostility I'd felt before, but something more complex. I saw in his eyes not a monster hunting us, but a man carrying the weight of responsibility. A captain who had completed his mission and needed the world to know his men hadn't died in failure. His expression held duty, determination, and a desperate need to finish his final task. For a moment, I felt I understood him. The officer caught between duty and death, trying to send one last message home, not for glory, but for his crew's honor. The moment broke as the second explosion hit, throwing us both off balance. But something had changed in that brief connection. I no longer felt like we were opposing forces trapped in the same nightmare. We were allies with the same goal: to set right a historical wrong and free both the living and the dead from this endless loop. The submarine reset again, and we continued our preparations, refining our understanding of the sequence of events and the layout of the submarine. During one reset, I found myself alone in the control room, while Javi and Ben investigated the engine section. Captain Richter stood at the periscope station, his ghostly hands gripping controls that had long since rusted away in our time. The first depth charge had just exploded, but the immediate panic hadn't yet set in. In this brief moment of relative calm, Richter turned his head and looked directly at me. Our eyes met across the impossible divide of a century, and something passed between us. Not the hostility I'd felt before, but something more complex. I saw in his eyes not a monster hunting us, but a man carrying the weight of responsibility. A captain who had completed his mission and needed the world to know his men hadn't died in failure. His expression held duty, determination, and a desperate need to finish his final task. For a moment, I felt I understood him. The officer caught between duty and death, trying to send one last message home. Not for glory, but for his crew's honor. The moment broke as the second explosion hit, throwing us both off balance. But something had changed in that brief connection. I no longer felt like we were opposing forces trapped in the same nightmare. We were allies with the same goal: to set right a historical wrong and free both the living and the dead from this endless loop. After that realization, our strategy shifted. The loops that followed became less about survival and more about coordination. Each reset turned into a rehearsal. Every failure, another layer of refinement. We began to move with intent instead of fear, tracing the submarine's doomed sequence of destruction until we could navigate it blindfolded. Javi took command of the diversions. Using his knowledge of the mechanical systems, he mapped out when and where each failure occurred: the flooding compartments, the rupturing bulkheads, the brief windows before the fires spread. He learned to use the submarine's own death against itself, redirecting chaos to buy us precious seconds. I watched the cynicism fade from his voice as he worked. Where he once believed in nothing but physics and inevitability, now there was something else. Faith, perhaps not in God, but in the idea that our choices still mattered. Ben, meanwhile, became our anchor. He'd been quiet through most of the loops, haunted by how often he'd died trying to reach us or protect the crew. But repetition forged him into something harder, steadier. He learned the corridors like arteries, knowing exactly where to push, where to pry, and how to move people out of danger before the next explosion. There was no hesitation in him anymore, only a quiet determination that made the rest of us believe we might actually pull this off. As for me, I found my perspective shifting in ways I hadn't expected. I had always approached this as a historian, an observer documenting tragedy without changing its outcome. But the loops refused to let me stay detached. Every face, every scream, every failed attempt to reach the radio room carved itself into me. I couldn't watch them die again without trying to make their story mean something. Richter's eyes haunted me most of all. The weight in them was the same weight I now carried. Together we forged our plan. Javi would create diversions to draw attention away from the radio section. Ben would clear the path through the flooding compartments, and I would reach the radio room and hold it long enough for Richter to send his message. The goal wasn't just to escape anymore, it was to finish what he started, to make sure history remembered them not as monsters or failures, but as men who refused to die unheard. In the final loops, our rehearsals became almost ritualistic. We marked each checkpoint in silence, fixing every detail in our minds. The sounds, the timing, the way the deck tilted just before the final implosion. There was a strange peace in it, knowing we had one last chance, and that everything we'd learned had led to this. When the last loop began, there was no more panic, no more scrambling through darkness, only purpose. I felt the cold metal of the navigation table beneath my fingertips as the world reset around us. The control room materialized in sharp detail, the dials, the gauges, the cramped space that had become our prison and battlefield. We had practiced this moment dozens of times, failed dozens of times, drowned dozens of times, but this time would be different. "Ready?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear crawling up my spine. Javi nodded, clutching his modified equipment. Ben took a deep breath and gave me a thumbs up. We all knew our parts. We had rehearsed them until they became muscle memory. I felt the cold metal of the navigation table beneath my fingertips as the world reset around us. The control room materialized in sharp detail. The dials, the gauges, the cramped space that had become our prison and battlefield. We had practiced this moment dozens of times, failed dozens of times, drowned dozens of times. But this time would be different. "Ready?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear crawling up my spine. Javi nodded, clutching his modified equipment. Ben took a deep breath and gave me a thumbs up. We all knew our parts. We had rehearsed them until they became muscle memory. The temperature dropped, and our breath formed clouds. They were coming. The ghostly crew appeared in the control room, Captain Richter at their center, his eyes finding mine. In that gaze, I saw recognition, not just of me as an intruder, but of what we were trying to do. "Now," I whispered. We split up as planned. Javi headed toward the engine room. Ben positioned himself at the critical junction where debris would block the corridor, and I stayed close to Richter, matching his movements through the submarine. The first depth charge hit right on schedule. The submarine pitched violently, throwing me against the bulkhead. My shoulder took the impact, but I pushed off and kept moving. Richter barked orders to his crew, his ghostly form cutting through the chaos with determined authority. 12 seconds later, the second explosion rocked the vessel. This was where things always went wrong. The ceiling panel that would come loose, the burst pipe that would block Richter's path. We knew every obstacle by heart now. I watched as Ben braced himself against the wall, arms outstretched to catch the falling debris that had trapped Richter in previous loops. The panel tore free with a screech of metal, but this time, Ben was there. He caught it, the muscles in his arms straining with the effort, and held it just long enough for Richter to pass through the narrow corridor. In the distance, I heard Javi shouting in the engine room, drawing away the ghostly sailors who had interfered with Richter's progress before. His voice echoed through the submarine, a lifeline of sound that kept us connected despite being separated. I followed Richter toward the radio room, counting seconds in my head. 29, 30, 31. The third depth charge would hit at 42 seconds. The pipe would burst at 44. I needed to be in position. The submarine groaned under the ocean's pressure, its hull straining. Water sprayed from small cracks, dampening my dry suit. I kept moving, my eyes on Richter's back. 42. The explosion hit with enough force to knock me off my feet. I stumbled but caught myself against the wall, pushing forward with renewed urgency. 43. Richter reached the door of the radio room. 44. I lunged forward as the pipe burst directly above him. Steam hissed into the corridor, steam that had killed him in every previous loop. This time I positioned myself between Richter and the pipe, feeling the heat sear through my dry suit onto my back. I gritted my teeth against the pain but held my position. Richter passed through me, his ghostly form chilling against the steam. He turned his head, our eyes meeting. He knew what I was doing. I followed him into the radio room as water began to pool around our ankles. The hull was failing faster now, the integrity compromised in multiple places. "The message," I gasped, watching as Richter took his seat at the radio station. Water surged from a new breach, quickly rising to our knees. In previous loops, this was when we'd be forced to retreat or drown. But this time, we stayed. I stood beside Richter as his translucent hands moved over the Morse key, tapping out his final communication to a world that had long forgotten him. Through the doorway, I caught glimpses of Ben holding back more debris, creating a path for Javi, who was now fighting his way toward us through knee-deep water. The fifth explosion hit, the most devastating yet. Metal tore and buckled. Alarms blared. The submarine listed sharply to port, but Richter kept tapping, his fingers moving with practiced precision even as the world collapsed around us. I couldn't understand Morse code, but I knew what he was sending. Duty fulfilled. Sinking. Long live Germany. The water reached my waist, then my chest. The crushing pressure of the ocean threatened to break through completely. Javi reached us, pulling Ben with him. We huddled together in the radio room, watching Richter complete the message that had kept him bound to this place for a century. With the final tap of the key, Richter straightened in his chair and turned to face us. His eyes, once filled with anger and fear, now showed peace and relief. He had finally completed a duty long overdue. The submarine gave one final, devastating groan. Water rushed in from all sides. I closed my eyes, waiting for the familiar darkness, the reset that always came. Instead, I felt a change in the water around us. It grew still, almost calm. When I opened my eyes, Richter was fading before me, his form becoming less substantial with each passing second. Behind him, his crew began to fade as well, their spectral forms dissolving into the water like smoke. The alarms stopped. The explosions ceased. The violent movement of the submarine halted. The ghostly crew vanished completely, leaving behind only the silent, flooded wreck of the U-117, exactly as it had been when we first entered it. The time loop was broken. We had helped Richter complete his final duty, send his final message, and in doing so, we had freed both him and ourselves from our shared prison. I looked at Ben and Javi, their faces illuminated by my dive light. We were back in the wreck, surrounded by the cold water of the North Sea. The strange energy that had held us was gone, leaving just 3 divers in a century-old submarine and the memory of a captain who had finally completed his mission. The control room hatch swung open with a gentle creak, breaking the heavy silence that surrounded us. I pushed against the cold metal, feeling the weight of our escape quite literally in my hands. Light from our headlamps cut through the darkness above, illuminating a narrow path to freedom. "Let's go," I said, my voice hoarse from exertion. Nice and slow, standard decompression stops. We were alive. Somehow, against all logic, we had survived what had felt like dozens of deaths. My muscles remembered each one even though my body showed no marks. I guided myself up the ladder, each rung cold and solid beneath my gloves, wonderfully, reassuringly real. "You first, Ben," I told him, noticing how his hands trembled. "Javi and I will follow." Ben nodded, his face pale inside his mask. He climbed past me without a word, his movements mechanical and precise. The fear that had made him lash out earlier was gone, replaced by something closer to shock. I watched him disappear through the opening, then turned to Javi. "You okay?" I asked. Javi was staring at the now empty control room, his scientific mind visibly struggling with what we'd experienced. "They're gone," he said simply. "All of them. Just gone." I followed his gaze. The submarine was just a wreck again, dark, silent, and empty of anything but rust, sediment, and a century of secrets. No ghostly figures moved between stations. No alarms blared. No Richter stood at attention, his eyes locked on mine. "His message got through," I said. Whatever Richter needed to say, he said it. Javi shook his head slightly. "How do we explain this? To anyone?" I had no answer for him. Instead, I gestured toward the hatch. "One problem at a time. Let's get out of here." As Javi climbed the ladder, I took one last look around the control room. Just hours ago, this had been a museum piece, a fascinating but static snapshot of history. Now it felt like a place where people had lived and died, where duty and purpose had transcended death itself. I touched the navigation table one last time, half expecting it to be warm with recent use, but it was only cold metal beneath my fingers. I followed Javi up the ladder and out through the conning tower, emerging into the open water. The peaceful darkness of the North Sea surrounded us, indifferent to the miracle we'd just experienced. The submarine rested below us, its hull intact and silent. No sign of the violent death it had suffered over and over in that strange loop of time. Ben and Javi hovered above the wreck, their lights pointed upward toward the surface that waited far above us. We were 120 meters down, with a long ascent ahead. I checked my dive computer. We still had enough air for the journey, including our decompression stops. Whatever had happened inside the U-boat, at least it hadn't drained our supplies. I signaled to the others, and we began our slow ascent. Away from the wreck, away from Captain Richter and his crew, away from the impossible. We made our first stop at 90 meters, floating in the emptiness as our bodies adjusted to the changing pressure. Ben's eyes were wide behind his mask, constantly moving as if expecting ghostly figures to materialize around us. Javi kept checking and rechecking his equipment, his scientific mind seeking refuge in measurable facts. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the gentle current rock me back and forth. The memory of Richter sitting at the radio, tapping out his final message, played in my mind. I hadn't understood the Morse code, but I'd felt the weight of his duty, the desperate need to complete his mission even as death surrounded him. Our ascent continued in stages, 70 meters, 50, 30. At each stop, I found myself thinking about what we'd witnessed. Not just ghosts, but souls trapped in a moment of crisis, forced to relive their final minutes until someone helped them complete their unfinished business. How many other wrecks might harbor similar secrets? How many other crews might be waiting for someone to help them find peace? At 15 meters, we made our final, longest stop. The water had lightened to a blue-green glow, the surface tantalizingly close above us. I could make out the dark shadow of our research vessel, the Eva Marsden, waiting for us. Morgan's voice crackled through our comms. startling me after so long without contact. "Team, do you copy? What's your status?" I pressed the talk button on my wrist unit. "We copy, Morgan. On our final decompression stop now." "Thank goodness," Morgan replied, relief evident in their voice. "You've been out of contact for almost 2 hours. What happened down there?" I exchanged glances with Javi and Ben. How could we possibly explain? "Equipment issues," I said simply. "We'll brief you when we surface." When we finally broke through to the air, the cloudy sky above seemed impossibly vast after the confined spaces of the submarine. The research vessel loomed beside us, and crew members hurried to help us aboard. Hands reached down, hauling us onto the deck one by one. Morgan rushed over, their face lined with concern. "What happened?" "Your comms went dead right after you entered the wreck." I pulled off my mask and hood, feeling the cold air against my face. "It's complicated." "Complicated?" Morgan's eyes narrowed. "You were off-grid for hours. We were about to send down the emergency beacon." Ben sat heavily on a bench, still in his dripping dry suit. "You wouldn't believe us if we told you." "Try me," Morgan challenged. Javi was already removing his gear, his movements precise and methodical. "How do you feel about ghost stories, Morgan?" Morgan looked between us, confusion plain on their face. "What are you talking about?" I started to unzip my dry suit, my fingers fumbling with the cold and fatigue. "We need to get out of these suits first. Then we'll explain. Or try to." In the equipment room, I peeled off my dry suit, hanging it carefully on the rack. My hands shook slightly as I reached into the pocket of my undersuit for my dive log, intending to make notes while everything was fresh in my mind. My fingers touched something cold and metallic that shouldn't have been there. I froze, then slowly pulled the object out, already knowing it couldn't be real, couldn't be possible. In my palm sat a small brass Morse key, old, worn but undamaged by water or time, the same key I had watched Richter use to tap out his final message. "That's not possible," I whispered to myself. The key was solid in my hand, its brass surface gleaming dully under the cabin lights. I turned it over, running my thumb across the engraved serial number and the Imperial German Navy insignia on its base. This couldn't have survived a century underwater, let alone found its way into my pocket. But here it was, tangible proof that what we'd experienced was real. "Eris?" Javi's voice came from behind me. "We need to figure out what we're going to tell." He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes fixed on the Morse key in my hand. "Is that—" I nodded, unable to speak. Javi stepped closer, his scientist's skepticism battling with the evidence before his eyes. "May I?" he asked, holding out his hand. I placed the key in his palm. He examined it carefully, testing its weight, running his fingers along its edges. "This is authentic," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "World War I era, German manufacturing." "It was in my pocket," I said. "It couldn't have been there. It shouldn't be here." Ben joined us, his hair still wet from the shower. He stopped when he saw what Javi was holding. "That's from the sub," he said. Not a question. Javi handed the key to Ben, who turned it over in his hands with reverence. "Richter's." I nodded. "It has to be." "So it wasn't just in our heads," Ben said, a note of relief in his voice. "We're not crazy." "No," I replied. "It was real, all of it." In the mess hall, we sat around a table with coffee mugs in front of us, trying to explain to Morgan what had happened. The Morse key sat in the center of the table, a physical anchor to our impossible story. Morgan listened without interrupting, their expression shifting from disbelief to concern to wonder. "You're saying you were caught in some kind of time loop?" they asked when we finished. "With the ghosts of the original crew?" "I know how it sounds," I said. Morgan picked up the Morse key, examining it. "And this just appeared in your pocket after you helped the captain send his message?" I nodded. "I think it's his way of saying thank you, or maybe proof that he was real." "What was the message?" Morgan asked. "Do you know what Richter was trying to communicate?" "I couldn't read Morse," I admitted. "But whatever it was important enough that his spirit, all their spirits, couldn't rest until it was sent." Javi cleared his throat. "Whatever happened down there, it doesn't fit into any scientific framework I understand, but I can't deny what I experienced." "We need to document this," Ben said suddenly. "All of it. Every detail before we start forgetting." "And then what?" Morgan asked. "You can't possibly think of publishing this. No academic journal would touch it." I took the Morse key back from Morgan, feeling its weight in my hand. "Maybe not, but that doesn't make it any less true." That night, alone in my cabin, I sat at my desk with my laptop open and the Morse key beside me. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the submarine filling with water, felt the cold touch of ghostly sailors passing through me, heard the terrible sound of the hull collapsing. Instead, I began to search. First for information about U-117 and its final mission, then about Captain Richter and his crew, and finally, about other mysterious shipwrecks, vessels that had disappeared under unusual circumstances, crews that had died with missions uncompleted, messages unsent, duties unfulfilled. There were more than I expected. A British destroyer sunk during a rescue mission in the Second World War, a Cold War submarine that vanished while tracking Soviet vessels, a research vessel lost during a storm while collecting crucial climate data. How many of them might harbor ghosts like Richter's? How many crews might be trapped in their final moments, waiting for someone to help them complete their unfinished business? I looked at the Morse key, its brass surface catching the light from my desk lamp. It was impossible, yet it was here. Tangible evidence that the boundaries between past and present, between life and death, were thinner than we imagined, especially beneath the ocean's surface, where time seemed to stand still. I opened a new document and began to type, recording everything we'd experienced in the U-117. This was just the beginning. Somewhere out there, in the dark depths, other wrecks waited with their secrets, their ghosts, their unfinished stories. And now I knew how to listen for them.